point. If anybody wants to be unmuted, at the end, feel free to use the raise your hand option. I'll ask you if you're raising your hand because you want to be unmuted, you want to have a conversation with Melanie and Heck. I'll be glad to do that. Liz said just replenished. Just replenished the plan.
Carolina.
There's so much more we could do. Yeah. Carolyn said, I didn't say it was a good plan. Carolyn's like, wait a minute now. But hey, at least you have one. And Karen says, we have an informal strategic technology plan and no strategic plan. Hands on her face. Oh, well, you're
That's
not alone.
interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
is. It is, Melanie. And I'm sure you're gonna bring that up and more about that in a moment.
yeah.
Yeah. So this is cool, guys. If you're just joining us, the question of the day is do you have a strategic plan and a strategic technology plan? I'm going to move out of the way. So great to be here with you all today. I need to make my screen larger so I can see what's going on. Yeah, today we're talking about strategic technology for nonprofits. For those of you, it's your first time here. I know many of you have been to our webinars. Most important thing about this webinar, you're going to get the recording and the slides later today, hopefully, if technology acts right. If you have a question, please put it in the Q&A. Heck is in the background. He'll be answering your questions. And of course, we'll answer them at the end. If you need the closed caption, go ahead and click on the CC button. I'm going to turn this over to Melanie Myers from Tech Impact. Melanie, take it away, and thanks for being here.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I think most of us are in the afternoon time. It's a pleasure to be here today, and you might be like, who is Tech Impact and why are we presenting this? So Tech Impact is a nonprofit serving nonprofits. Our mission is to leverage technology to advance social impact. We do that through several ways. We offer full spectrum nonprofit tech services, anything from managed IT support to cloud migrations, hard infrastructure stuff, moving organizations around, cybersecurity, risk assessments, anything, and then we have a whole innovation team, and that's where Heck lives. And that's where we do our data management, outcome measurement, reporting, digital services. So anything under the sun that touches a nonprofit in terms of technology, we have the ability to help. We do a lot of nonprofit educational resources and webinars, just like TechSoup. We do some independent research also. I always like to explain it as we take a lot of the research away from you, where we put together, so say you're looking for a donor management system, we'll go to market, look at the 26, 27 most common donor management systems, and then break it down by cost, feature, and capabilities, just to give you a little leg up on your research. And then we have a whole workforce development program where we teach young adults IT skills and then help place them in formidable careers and internships. So really well-rounded nonprofit with a lot of legs and arms, and I'm sure just like many of your nonprofits. Why am I presenting? I don't know. I guess I'm somewhat of an expert. Not really. Just a little bit on my background. I served an organization for 20 years as their tech resource, data management, marketing, big event management, sponsorship. So I was kind of that accidental techie that joined an organization, grew up there, and before you knew it, held a multiple responsibilities. But that's allowed me to see the challenges that nonprofits have in terms of issues, and then help make them form decisions where technology can help aid that. I've been with Tech Impact now a little bit, about 5 years now, and I love working with our customers, discussing where they need assistance and then help guiding them to the right solutions. And then I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
Thanks, Mel. And hi, and good afternoon for those of us who are in the afternoon time. Good morning for those who are in other times. Like Mel mentioned, my name's Hec Maldonado Reeves. My pronouns are they, them, please. I am the Managing Director of Impact Strategy here at Tech Impact. I have the fortunate opportunity to lead two teams here, our technology consulting team, and as well as our measurement and evaluation team. Our work really is developmental in the sense that we approach everything we do from a learning lens. We want you all to be educated. We want you to be engaged. And so our approach is very much putting your best foot forward and making sure that we're providing all the strategic consulting, but also translating that into implementation within your organization. You'll see me in the Q&A, so any questions that you might have, please pop them there. And otherwise, you'll hear from me a little bit later. Thanks, Mel.
Well, hopefully throughout the presentation, because Hack brings a different perspective from what I bring, and sometimes he can say it much more eloquently than I can do it. Today we're going to talk about the importance of a strategic technology plan. It's nice to see that some of you have plans. I was never that organized in my previous role. We're going to talk about tactical tech, right? Infrastructure, productivity, and security, and where you need to be. And then we're going to talk a little bit about data and strategic systems, and then help provide you some resources you can use in the future. So again, when you're talking strategic technology, right, versus tactical technology, so tactical is going to be kind of your short-term operational needs and quick fixes. Quick fixes is kind of a light term, but you want to make sure that you decipher tactical, like we need to update our file share or move it to the cloud or whatever is going to be more of a tactical. We need to replace workstations is tactical versus strategic. It's going to align with your long-term organizational goals and vision. And that's why I was surprised that someone had a strategic technology plan, but no regular strategic plan. So understanding your organizational goals and vision should typically come from your overall strategic plan. Tactical efforts address immediate problems. A lot of times nonprofits struggle with just being at baseline standards. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and tactical ways that you can get where you need to be before you start really thinking and adopting strategic thought process. Strategic is really comprehensive planning and resource allocation. Like if you're going to take on big initiatives, change the way I don't know, service your programs, the clients, expanding reach, really that's going to take really a comprehensive and strategic approach to it. Tactical is usually reactive, and then strategic is more proactive. And then again, both approaches are essential. On my side of the house, I see quite a few nonprofits that don't have a strong foundation and where they have to do quite a bit of tactical work before they can touch on the strategic in some areas. So my thing really today too is we're going to try and balance the discussion. Some of the discussion is get your house in order, and then a lot of it is thinking long-term vision and strategy. Again, this is a great picture, right? Because a strategic plan is especially important for nonprofits because it ensures that your investments directly support your mission. I know the limited resources that nonprofits have, and every time I start a conversation with a nonprofit, cost is always the top of the mind. It doesn't even go to how can this help us? It's like, is this going to cost a lot? I'm a small nonprofit. We don't have the funds, right? So I understand that. So it's making the most of what is at your disposal and then what you can do strategically. This image depicts it, right? You need to have strong productivity and collaboration. We'll talk about that. Your infrastructure needs to be sound. Your data systems, again, with the lens of cybersecurity around that all, and governance. But as you can see this image, everything touches one another. So say that you don't have strong infrastructure practices and you don't have strong productivity and collaboration or security, digital strategy, right? It's all works in tandem. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that.
No, and if I can on this picture, just really briefly to kind of just the echoing of an organization's almost readiness to engage in strategic work is oftentimes seen as an investment to those points, right? And those are real concerns. But one of the key pieces of having a strategic technology plan is that in alignment with your mission alignment, right, and the work that you're delivering, in theory, if you're executing your strategic technology plan, you should be seeing cost savings from that work. What I mean by that is that we often spend times doing one-offs or quick solutions to problems that really end up amassing in cost, and not just in cost, but also limit our abilities to speak across units and departments in the organization to maybe leverage some of those insights that would be really helpful for decision making. So just wanted to highlight that piece as well.
Extremely valid point. And we get into cloud systems, right? And it, depending on the size, just we typically, when we come in and assess, or when you really assess things, you see waste. You see duplicate licensing, not taking advantage of nonprofit discounts, and just streamlining systems when there's the governance and the ownership over this. So very solid point. So why create a strategic technology plan? I will say I did not do this. The strategy lived in my head. And I was not good with communicating that to others at the organization. Like, we need to do this so we can grow to this and grow to that. I never took the time to write it down. So this just provides a clear roadmap to achieve your organizational goals, and then it'll help align your team towards that common mission. Um, and then really it comes down to, I mean, just getting the allocation of the resources and the budget. And that is an area I always struggled with. It seems like the more money I saved in terms of IT, the lower my budget got in terms of my spend. So I think when you're putting this in front of leadership, saying this is where we need to be strategically with technology, this is how it's going to better our mission and align with our strategic goals, the more willing they are to go look for resources and budget, and you're not going to have those constraints. Supports decision making with data and foresight. And then again, it facilitates communication with stakeholders and funders, and that's in a lot of different ways. It could be your clients, it could be your funders, and saying, look at our growth trajectory, we're going to incorporate technology. I know funders are a little bit stingy when it comes to, not stingy, but a lot of funding has been diminished for tactical technology efforts. And they want to see that the organization is evolving and growing its programs, delivery, et cetera, in order to get tech funds. Is that something you see, Heck, in terms of technology, or anything you want to add here, why it's important to have a plan?
Yeah, I was responding to the question in the chat, so sorry, let me come back to this.
Yeah,
No, I think that, a couple things are that when we think about a strategic technology plan, people immediately think about the implementation of said plan, right? Much of the work that we do is to provide insights, guidance into almost prioritizing those tactical decisions while you're really solidifying your strategic implementation. I say that to say that our strategic technology plan is also a deliverable that you can bring to your funders, right? So oftentimes we search for funds to try and support some sort of technology implementation in the organization, but don't have the narrative in place to be able to showcase to those investors, whether they're through funds like philanthropies or it's just giving. We don't have the ability to say, this is what your support will help us. So from a funding perspective, our strategic technology plan helps you prioritize the work, but also align what that infrastructure needs to look like. But it also serves as a communication for those who might be funding your work, for you to be able to secure the needs to be able to implement those infrastructures and data systems in place. So I think that's really important, where other than being technical, it also serves as a communication tool for leadership in some ways and forms.
right. Like years ago, I went and visited a nonprofit on site and was just kind of getting the lay of the land of their nonprofit and where they were struggling with technology. And they're like, we have this case management system that we don't use, that we're paying $24,000 a year for. And it's like, why aren't you using it? And they're like, so and so funded the project, so we saw another organization use it, and so we just put that into our grant, request. And so that was waste. And it really bothered me walking away that those funds with somebody with a technology plan and a focus on utilizing that technology maybe lost out on dollars that could have been reallocated somewhere else. But funders are getting much more savvy. They want to know, why are you, doing this, and is it going to be used, and is it going to be aid in the overall success of the organization? So then it gets to who should be involved, right, during the strategic technology plan. One thing that I always urged is, I think that we're going to talk about who should be involved in the strategic technology plan. And if you're doing it again in conjunction with your strategic plan, I think that someone with technology experience should always sit on that committee or be involved with strategic plan, because having that person sit there and be able to see what your strategy is through a technical lens could help aid in development of your strategic plan. And there might be edits after somebody with technology sees it in a mindset. Only because I think there's a ton of opportunity. So I would have someone with technology experience sitting in while you're doing the strategic plan when it's appropriate. And then again, who should be involved in the strategic technology plan should be diverse representation from all organizational departments. Of course, tech, um, if you have it, the chief executive, but also think about all of your program delivery, just somebody that represents all of those. I think when we do it for an organization, heck, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm thinking we identify quite a few individuals to talk to.
We do. And that to the question that Beth has on, it's a great question to leverage in this point, which is when an organization is smaller, might not have a directed IT individual, our engagement really covers the needs of the organization. So we have our framing of what we think are the domains that Mel just showed in that graph. That's really a cloud and beautiful. We consider all those domains, but we also tie it to the maturity of the organization, right? The same recommendations for one organization are not going to be the same recommendations that we find in another. Oftentimes, the more people we speak to, the more specific we can be with recommendations. But we also understand that there's trade-offs between capacity of people's time and who can dedicate to this type of planning. You'll find that we are very strategic in mapping what the organization looks like before we decide who we need to interview. But part of that is because we're taking a lens of understanding how those different units, departments, or people are connected via processes, systems, and communication. And much of that is to make sure we're covering our gaps in what people need, but also that the users that are going to consume this technology are on board with the process and are also giving us their feedback in that stakeholder map.
And I think, Beth, when you look at it, right, we're a consultant firm, like we can help, right, think about technology and put the strategic lens on it. I think maybe looking for a board member with the right skills, if you have someone currently sitting on the board who can open up opportunity and come at your strategic plan with the strategic lens. There are other organizations out there that have some skill-based volunteerism, right? So, or connecting with local businesses who might be able to lend talent. But if budget allows, I would definitely bring in an outside consultant or an outside firm to come in with that lens. Um, again, you want to involve leadership as much as you can. End users, we do a all staff survey, right? So that end users are heard and we're able to take their input and their struggles and align it with the strategic plan. I always say, you better be talking to those administrative staff. They know the struggles with the systems and what needs to be fixed, and they can really highlight the issues of the organization. And then again, external advisors, consultants, board members, someone from a local business. I know this doesn't relate to technology, but in my former role, I struggled with marketing and communications, just having the resources, the bandwidth, and the ability to get things done. So we formed a marketing and communications committee that really rallied behind me and helped, provide resources so that I could accomplish what I needed to accomplish. And they weren't necessarily all board members of the organization. They were friends of board members that came in on a committee basis just to lend their expertise. So I think look at the resources around you. So this is where, you see I'm playing on tech impact. This is where tech has impact on nonprofits, right? In terms of delivery. So let's just think about donor engagement and fundraising. So an example I'm going to use is Charity Water uses digital storytelling and GPS tracking to show donors exactly where their money goes. So what the impact was, it was increased transparency and donor trust, and it led to higher engagement and repeat donations. So it's just thinking outside the box of your tactical tech planning. So then data-driven program delivery. So example, Feeding America uses AI and data analytics to optimize food distribution across its network. It reduced food waste and improved delivery efficiency to communities in need. And I'm sure Heck has more of these examples, but let's say for volunteer management, Habitat for Humanity uses volunteer management platforms to schedule, track, and communicate with volunteers. Again, it's streamlined operations and better volunteer retention. That could have been happening in Google Sheets, Docs, and Excel, but by adopting a platform to be able to help aid in that work, they've streamlined operations and then just have better volunteer retention. Heck, do you want to share anything on top of mind? I got a couple other examples, but I think if you're able to share one, break up the
Yeah,
voices a little.
yeah, no worries. I'll briefly share too. I think that one that it's perhaps the most obvious, so pardon if this sounds too cheeky, but I think it's the reality of the baseline entry level solutions, right? So as part of a strategic plan, we also just look at what is the routine work that should be happening in an organization, whether that's like a managed services, whether it's a cybersecurity audit, whether that's a data check on the quality of data. Those are like what I would consider low effort, high impact tasks are really important and can be different for organizations. Now, a different sense of where our work is helpful is through almost a measurement lens. And, when we think about learning and measurement, it's very difficult when we try doing much of that learning, development, and iteration from just one programmatic data set, especially when organizations have more than one program, more than one operation vertical. So I think really importantly, our work also centers around the idea hitting on that point of collaboration is what infrastructure, what cloud do you need? Do you need APIs? Meaning, does the data have to all be integrated into one location for it all to be analyzed and understood on insights? So I think important for us is also that as we're going through the organization and finding opportunities, most of the questions people really want to get out of their data are complex and integrated. It require complex and integrated pieces of information. And I think having that landscape of where does all of your data live and how can you centralize it towards analyzing it in one view is really important for this process as well.
Great points. So I think as you think on, like, I think this is really a think tank, and I don't know if that dates me in an age. A think tank is an old term to use anymore. But that was one thing that our staff came together, once a year, and we really had a think tank and looked at what we did and said, how can we improve our services? How can we expand our reach? How can we deliver it better? And I think at this time, there is so much more opportunity than there was 20 years ago to really expand upon your mission and think about how you could leverage every avenue of technology. And so it's probably, to me, I would find that an extremely exciting opportunity to like sit and strategize about how we can leverage technology. Just like in terms of social media, this is really going to date me, but I was, the one that took us from paper to starting. I mean, I remember when Facebook and Twitter and all that came, and I took our organization to social media. That time, social medias were some organizations on it, some were not. But now I look at how that avenue has grown. And so like when you look at like something like Amnesty International, they use social media to, to do digital campaigns to mobilize global support for human rights. Like that wasn't available 20 years ago, right? Because social media wasn't what it is. So just looking at all those avenues of technology and how you can leverage them is really exciting. But I am a big lover of, I get 2x2. I'm sorry. I love this, right? Because you can really sit there and say, does it have strategic alignment? Is it high strategic? Is it low? And then, how complex is this, right? For whatever you want to implement. And I think this 2x2 is incredibly helpful in terms of, because you're probably going to have a full list of things you want to do, but then you're going to be able to chart it and say, based on strategic alignment and tech complexity, where are our next steps in terms of strategy? So as I close out this section, I'm going to start to get into some boring stuff, but necessary stuff to talk about. So Heck, before we leave, the importance of a strategic technology plan, anything you want to add?
No, I think you covered it all, and I would just kind of just echo that the strategic technology plan has three main functions. One is, well, the technology aspect of infrastructure and getting your house in order. The second is that it serves as a communication tool, not just for your organization, but also for your board and funders. And I think the last one, just like a strategic plan, the most valuable aspect of a strategic technology plan is going through the process. So the actual sitting through the process, the answering the questions, the saying, no, that's not what I would prefer, or that's not how I necessarily do it. Just really thinking about the fact that that's core to the work because it's not just about people collaborating with each other, it's also the processes that collaborate with one another. So just kind of wanted to echo those points from Mel's perspective there.
Great. I love having somebody just follow whatever I say. It's not that awkward silence, like, okay, I'm going to move to the next slide.
Love it.
All right, infrastructure. It's the fun stuff. It's, you got to keep your hardware up to date and have a solid replacement cycle. Um, you can't keep workstations 7 to 10 years, right? At max, nonprofits, we see 5 year. If you're at least on a 5 year, I think industry best practices is update hardware every 3 to 4 years. I know nonprofits let's just get on a 5 year replacement cycle. You want to make sure that those workstations are updated, patched, managed, have antivirus, everything is there on the workstations. If you're still on a server, let's talk about cloud solutions and getting you off that server. But if you do, make sure with any solution that you have a clear disaster recovery and business continuity plan. And a lot of nonprofits are like, well, we're in the cloud. We're fine. We don't have to have a DR plan. No, you do. Because think about, anytime I talk about cybersecurity, I'm like, it's not if, it's when. So you have to have clear and then, communication paths for your employees on what's going on. Say your email gets hacked, right? Someone has control. No staff can get into email. They can't get in any of your cloud platforms. The next day, you have a remote staff. How are you going to communicate with that staff? So these are the things when you have a disaster recovery plan, you want to think about how are we going to communicate to staff? How are we going to recover from this breach? And what are our action steps if something like this happens? So I always recommend a clear disaster recovery plan. And I think a lot of auditors will kind of bring that into when they're auditing your organization, and they'll want to have like, what's your point of contacts and what if something happens? And then what you want to do is just ensure that any technology you're putting into place can accommodate organizational growth and changing needs. I have you a little checklist here. But when you have some time, you just want to take, rate your infrastructure. If you're having challenges with any of these, you might want to put a little bit of work into your infrastructure. Number one, having clear oversight for IT. You need to have somebody who owns IT at the organization. Even if you're 3 people, someone needs to be in charge. Or look for someone outside who can help manage your IT for you. Make sure workstations are under 5. No more Windows 10 here in 15 days. So everything needs to be Windows 11 Pro. Again, keep workstations up to date, have a cycle. If you have a server, let's really talk about moving you to the cloud. Make sure your internet, you're shopping that around, right? Is it reliable and fast? And then policies exist, and you're going to hear me say that again further down the line in terms of having concrete computer use policies. So productivity and collaboration. I always like to do this in the presentation because it's If you are on Microsoft, say Microsoft. If you're on Google, say Google. And if you're on both, put both. And I always love to do that exercise. So if you can put that in the chat, that would be helpful. Oh, I see a lot of both. And that's typically what I see quite a bit, right, in my role. And a pretty even split between Microsoft and Google, but let's talk about both. So in terms of choosing a productivity and collaboration platform, you want to utilize a unified cloud system because it's going to help you streamline your workflows and data management. Email is in one platform, file share is another. That's not good for future work and how you're able to do your work. So you want to pick one and choose it. It's also going to allow you to secure one infrastructure because security is always at top of mind, which whatever one you're using. So say your file share is in Google and your email is in Microsoft. You have secure data in both those environments, and both of them are going to need to be set up for multi-factor authentication, kind of vetting who you are before you access that information. Why would you want to do that in both environments if you just consolidated to one environment and had to do that security protocol and that in one? Now, I know a lot of organizations might say, hey, we're in both because Microsoft had that free business premium license where you got the Microsoft Office product donations, right? The Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and you might just be using Microsoft for that. That's about to go away. But if you love those tools, why not live in Microsoft? Would be my question. So if you want to, like when you're in a unified system, and we're going to hit on this in the next slide, by being in one system, you're going to be able to use the automation tools in all of those unified cloud systems to unify and streamline your workflows. So we'll talk a little bit more about it. And then a lot of times I see why organizations aren't in one is because of lack of training. I hear a lot of misinformation, like I can easily collaborate with others in Google. And it's like, well, you can in SharePoint and Microsoft, right? So understanding that training is key to anything that you implement in your environment. And then I think, so again, you're going to want to rate your productivity and collaboration. Is your email, your calendar, and your file sharing all in one system? Does staff know how to use it? Can you easily add and remove users? I mean, chat, I think instant messaging is kind of an old term now, but are you using the chat and the Teams functions in each of those systems? Everybody asked me, like, these were things I wanted to do years ago, and COVID was rough, right? It really forced us to start leveraging this technology to its fullest. So, the world has changed post-COVID. So I like to see the adoption of more of these tools and more of the collaboration tools available. Again, what I said, are you taking advantage of automation? So again, automating repetitive tasks to save time and reduce errors. Again, it improves operational efficiency, data accuracy. I don't know if that's ever 100%, but at least you can get somewhat consistent on it. But then it helps free up staff from mundane tasks so they can be a little bit more strategic. And then, hopefully reduces cost over time. So heck, that was a lot. And I'm sure you have some summary thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate this. I think that a couple things that I'm trying to recall that are most important here. So number one is this idea, I'm going to use a technical term. You all don't need to remember this, but I'm going to use it, is what Mel's talking about is multiplicity, which means that the more systems you have, the more you have to have everything for them, meaning like a governance process, people need to know how to use it, you need to be great on its security. So partially, the challenge is not just about, choosing the tools that are affordable. The other challenge is the risks that are associated with those tools that are affordable. So really thinking about your task as an organization. If you have, patient data, if you're a nonprofit that works with patient data, there's a whole level of consideration that you want to be mindful of. And so even the idea of moving data between systems becomes even more apparent, and the value of collaboration. On the other side, when we're thinking about nonprofits, we talk about costs and we talk about engagements of the nature. Just really wanted to highlight the idea of automation, well, not just the idea, the process of automating work really does have a return on investment to an organization. And whether, it's very hard to determine what that return on investment is without deciding what the organization wants to get out of the automation process. But what we find is that people do free up their time. Tasks are removed. How many times have you gotten an email, moved that file from that email into a folder in SharePoint when that process entirely could be automated and you don't even have to think about it? So what I'm trying to highlight here is that technology, yes, does technology solutions, but it'll also guide a lot of the work that's happening operationally within the organization. And things like compliance on some of these decisions and how often things are being done. It just provides a different ability to be able to comply with your processes and also the regulations that your funders have. And the last point that I'll make is that Mel calls it a little boring. I find it fun, but on the sense of like infrastructure and data and collaboration, those are all very technical pieces, right, of an organization's maturity. But funders more and more increasingly care about you having these things in place. So it's almost this catch-22 dynamic of if you're not mature enough, quote unquote, on your infrastructure, are you limiting the grants, philanthropic gifts, or donors that can come your way? And that's really important as well. It's really to the livelihood of your organization. Being equipped and mature in today's day and age puts you at a different space of receiving funds or being eligible for them. Not that there's anything we can do about that in some spaces, but just wanted to kind of provide the value of this approach and how it's helpful in different ways.
Fantastic. And Courtney, I love it. What do you mean by automation? Right? Automation can mean several different things and based on complexity of automation. But simple, if you were living all in Microsoft 365, say an email comes with the subject header, right? And anything with that subject header, or you want, that recipient to be sent a form for completion. Then that form, once it's completed, needs to notify 3 people that it's been completed, and maybe you need an auto signature, right? So just thinking about those repetitive tasks you do on a daily basis that you can automate. Then there's complexity of automation where you might say a new donor gets added to our donor system. And then we want them added to another, like then you're talking complexity, but there's a ton of opportunity to leverage automation within these cloud environments. I would say Microsoft more than Google, but I don't want to put Google down. I'm just saying that, nonprofits are only touching the surface of these unified cloud systems and their abilities and what they can do. So yes, we help organizations get into these environments day in and day out, but you have to be thinking about what's next and how you leverage these unified systems. Hopefully that answers your question. All right, now Heck is going to take over and they are going to share data and strategic systems.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Mel, and hi everyone. You're hearing me talk a little. Um, Thank you for this setup, and I think it's a really important ordinal process we presented to you. And what I mean by that is that we talked about the technology so that we can talk about the purpose of the technology next, right? I want to be mindful that oftentimes we think about technology and data as separate, but we really implement technology because the information that it's holding is of importance to us. And so when we think about data, I want to almost demystify that data is numbers alone. Any type of response is data, whether that's how many times somebody clicked on an email or did they not click. All of those are pieces of information. And so our approach is really thinking about what can technology help us emerge and surface that is information that might not be there. So just wanted to talk about that from a lens of how to think about data from a strategic purpose. And when we engage with you all in a strategic planning process, it's really important for us that we understand the ecosystem of where your information lives. Oftentimes, information also lives in cabinets, in paper. It's not only just digital technology, right? So as we're going through these processes of strategic technology planning, organizations have the opportunity, like I said, the process is really important, which is about understanding the risks of why something like a paper copy might be not the greatest use for what they're trying to accomplish, or why it's limiting the work and the task that they're trying to receive. On the other side, really important from data systems, Mel brought this up, which is data needs to be audited. If we consume information and we never really think about at what points is it being audited, by who, and by audit, I mean we need to check that it's right. Not just that the data is working and coming in, but we also need to make sure that we have processes in place to audit that data and interrogate it and determine, are we collecting the information the right way? Is there a specific school that's not necessarily connecting this particular type of data in the way that we need them to? So there is also the change management component that is associated with data infrastructures, which is, yes, we can find a lot of problems, but what are we going to do about it? And that's almost as important than identifying the different solutions. On the other side, I was talking a little bit earlier about how many of our questions are complex in nature, and that means really that we just want data from different places to be able to answer a question sometimes, and we need that data from different places. That can work here and there. We can maybe connect two systems, but when we're thinking about having an internal culture of learning and adaptation and internal improvements and enhancements to the technology, to the way we deliver programs, the way we grant grants, that really we're talking about scalability and replicability. So having the technology in place allows us to do the same thing once again in the future. And what that means is maybe it's the same process of automating a report. Maybe it's the process of making sure that at the end of the year, all of the salaries are summarized and HR has information. This really applies to every unit in the organization. And what I'm trying to convey here is, as you can see, is that whether it's HR, finance, programs, or operations, the technology of a nonprofit has the impact both to the operations and the delivery of programs. And the last piece that I'll say about just how we think about the strategic systems is, there's a communication between systems. We can figure out how to have them have an in-between place where they communicate. That's not the issue. I think the more important task is that when you streamline data, when you align your processes to your systems, I was talking about compliance earlier, but there's also the other side to your clientele program participants, which is satisfaction. People are just more satisfied when a tool works. I don't know how many of you have gone into something, a website or some sort of form sometime, and you're really being like, oh, this is annoying or this doesn't really work. That's a really superficial way on how technology does us bad in some ways. And having those structures in place really helps with client satisfaction. And if at best, gives us the ability to collect feedback to understand how to improve. And that's the ecosystem here, how we think about strategically. So it's issue at hand, but it's also to resolve a task or a pain point in the organization that's longstanding.
And I just want to point out what he said, and I couldn't agree more. You just don't, want to cut and paste what you are currently doing into a new process and system. So tech and systems at the end of the day should help make things easier and faster. Um, so data, and it's right, it's not a set it and forget it. I'm going to age myself again. The organization I used to work for, we served about 900 organizations per annum in all different capacities. The technology wasn't what it is today. And I think, heck, when you talk about scrubbing data, validating data, and all that, I was validating it by going through 200 or 300 line items, right? And validating the data. But I think there are tools in place now that can help you validate your data.
Yeah, and I think that's really an important point, right? That oftentimes most of what we're talking about, it's a multi-system solution will come your way, and some steps have to be in place. So first, the data has to be moved. The system has to understand what the data is to be able to then say, is it appropriate data? But there's tools, technologies, and processes that can be implemented for that instead of a human.
I used to do old school highlighter, so
That's a lot of work.
a lot of work.
No,
But my data was clean the
there
best
you
I
go,
could.
right? Right. The trade-offs
Yeah.
of accuracy and volume. No, but so we talked about strategic plans, and it's really important that you understand that our philosophy for strategic planning is really around we want each organization to be doing the best of their abilities, and we don't want technology to be a barrier for the reason why you're not being able to produce more work or engage more people if that's your mission. For that reason, all of our work in general here at Tech Impact, for the most part, follows a very systematized approach, which is we learn from you, we tell you what we heard, and then we recommend solutions. And that philosophy carries out throughout much of what our engagements look like. For us, specifically here on our technology consulting space, there's two verticals. When we really think about any type of new project, we go back to the idea of being mission-driven organizations, right? Oftentimes, we find that organizations are trying to fit the technology to their mission rather than take a pause and determine what technology best aligns with their mission. I get it. We need to keep operations moving on a day-to-day basis. We need to communicate. But for that reason, that's why strategic planning is the forefront of this conversation. Like Mel mentioned, there are costs associated with taking a pause and reflecting. But on the other side, we believe philosophically that when you pause and understand your technology and your needs, as in the further left here, your technology consulting, when you understand what's relevant, what's sustainable from a funder perspective, sometimes people leverage up a platform with a grant that they have no way of continuing that platform when the grant disappears. So what does that mean for your organization? What decisions do you need to make about the cost and sustainability? That's associated with the technology consulting. In the middle lens is once we understand your needs for the technology is really the measurement and evaluation work. I say measurement and evaluation loosely here. You can consider it learning. But at the end of the day, we measure and evaluate to change. So everything we do in our organization is to enable you to be able to make those decisions, to be able to move information from one aspect, from one cloud, from one system to another, and to be able to interpret and make insights. So once you understand all of your technology and can consult you and advise you on that work, we then move into determining what it is that you're trying to report on. I don't want to get too technical and give you all an evaluation 101 or 201 session here, but at the end of the day, this work really looks like being able to determine what pieces of information exist within your organization to answer the questions that you have. Do you need to go outside of your organization and leverage the interwebs and open source forms of data? And then to what end, right? Getting to the details of outputs, outcomes, impact, all those pieces of information. Oftentimes we find that people understand those concepts. It's just that their technology systems don't enable them to be able to gather that information and best report on it. So thinking about the work, thinking about the technology, thinking about really the mission and the theory around the mission, then we enter the process of implementation. And for us, that's really important. We don't want to implement work that isn't going to be strategically impactful. So getting back to the point that tactical implementations are very helpful depending on the need and the complexity. But when we are talking about a strategic technology plan, we're also thinking about big chunk change management processes, whether of people and systems as well. So we really want to separate in our work that implementation phase for the reason of we want to understand what your needs are. We want to almost validate through the measurement and evaluation process what those outcomes and outputs and impact goals are. But then we also want to make sure that the implementation roadmap is sustainable and successful from the lens of what needs to happen and what cadence and how long is that process going to take place. And I think that the last thing that I'll say about this slide is that when we're thinking about implementation, people often ask like, how long will something take to implement? And the answer to that is that it depends really on where the organization starts in terms of its maturity and technology. Something could be implemented in as soon as a couple months, whereas sometimes implementations, depending on the scale and the complexity, could take a year or more. So just to highlight that technology adoption and changes are broad and vast, but in our philosophy here at Tech Impact, we really think about understanding your needs first and validating those needs, then really thinking from a critical lens of learning, how can we adopt those needs effectively before we move into implementing those changes.
And
Now,
your staff has to be change ready, and if they're not change ready, just get used to hearing it, right? Because I don't think I've ever talked to one organization where they're like, yay, change, everybody's on board and so happy. Just have patience along the implementation process. Um, and your staff and those that need a little extra hand holding, but continuous communication and telling them what the light is at the end of the tunnel and how much better you're going to be in the end doesn't really work, but you can do it. They're still going to complain, right? Implementing any new system, painful. I think you can help ease their pain by having a solid plan and a solid process behind any implementation.
yeah. Yeah. And adoption, right? Like you want this is really an important slide. Thanks, Mel. And so, kind of wrapping up this almost like high level conversation. Instead of thinking of strategy as high level, I think a really great way of thinking of strategy is thinking of it as a bookend experience, meaning like what's the beginning and what's the end, and really trying to put steps in place in the middle to successfully implement that work. And I think that from our lens, when we're considering what can organizations do, so number one is, as I mentioned, a lot of our work is understanding your systems, but then it's also ensuring that you have what we would consider your social impact strategy or your organizational strategy for affecting your work. Why do you do what you do is a really great question, but when you start asking people and you uncover the surface, what emerges is because our grant asks us for this reporting, because these are the important pieces of information that we were told by our funder. And sure, people have some theories of change. I threw it in there. I was trying to avoid the term, but some people have theories of change in their organization and their programs. But a really big component is how do all of those different programs connect and elevate the impact of the organization. A second aspect is that when we're really thinking about your organization, we really also want to understand how can evaluation be used as a proactive tool. So not just to comply and say, this is how we did, but more so, how can we change in the future? And that's not much, there's not more other to say to that. That's a developmental mindset. And it's also an embedded culture within the organization that allows for movement of what is good and what is not as beneficial for your programs. When we think about data and reporting support, we really are just thinking, how can, oftentimes we find people develop dashboards, and that's great and all, but a dashboard, the way that we approach our work is really thinking about retroactively of what is it that you're trying to communicate with your tool. That's a different question than can you build us a dashboard that has all this information. When we approach our work, it's really thinking about how can we best support you into a conversation for being able to discuss what it is that is informational and what's just analytical information. Then a couple last pieces that I'll mention is its readiness. And we conduct a lot of assessments for organizations, whether that's of maturity, on technology, on cybersecurity, on digital, on data. We just do a lot of assessing to be able to provide for people where they sit today. It's really important to understand your current state today before we try determining your future state. Oftentimes, we find that people can have a lot of directions because they've heard that this future thing is the best direction to go in. But it's really important for us that our recommendations match your business requirements as a nonprofit organization. And the last thing that I'll say that are much more nuanced and catered to today's date is that just to introduce generative AI and AI in general, a big component of our work now has really folded into everything we've just discussed, layer AI. What that means is, how is AI helping in automation? How prepared is your organization to leverage AI for automation versus not? How secure are your systems? How integrated are your systems? A lot of what we're talking about in terms of just what would be considered as like I don't want to use the word low effort, but more like entry level efforts in the sense of like these are really great best practices. They all also translate into meeting all the requirements to successfully leverage AI within your organization. Although that's not the point of this entire discussion, I did want to bring that up that strategically, when we're thinking about validation of data, AI is a great opportunity there to explore in the future and that type of engagement. So when you think about holistically, a strategy really is the bookend experience. And what I mean by that is just when you put books and there's two heavy things on the sides, there's the beginning and the end, and there's all the books in the middle. A strategic approach is really thinking about how can we make sure that this is our defined beginning and this is where we're headed and how close we follow to that vision. And it's really important for us to make sure that we're not just managing the change of systems and technology, but also people and their expectations.
Great summary.
Yeah.
I'm going to go through the next session really quickly to allow at least some minutes for Q&A. I'm going to hit these slides really quick, but you're going to get the deck after this so you can go through and read all my points. Governance and security. Again, security at the key should be embedded in anything that we talked about today. So here are some security best practices, but you have to be looking through everything with a lens. have some policies and effective use guidelines for staff. What is acceptable, what is unacceptable, but define it. They don't know until you define it, what is acceptable and what is not, especially around the use of AI. It's a hot topic. Please don't have them be putting, identifiable or confidential information or anything related to your organization in any free AI tool. So that would be mine. You can use Copilot or any other AI tool and say, give me sample AI policies, and you'll get a really nice sample policy around that. Train, retrain, train again. So just make sure that whatever you're implementing, whatever you're doing, that you have a strong training path, and that those training resources are available to staff. I will tell you, I recently started using Scribe for documenting my trainings. It is heaven. So check out Scribe as a great resource for training. It records your path, no more cutting and pasting in a Word to get instructions out. Again, Teams videos, I think Meetup records videos, but any kind of recorded videos, but make sure that you're creating training and resources. So then an overview of today: align tech with organizational mission for maximum impact, balance tactical infrastructure needs with long-term strategic goals, engage diverse stakeholders, prioritize infrastructure, productivity, and security, and then continuous evaluation and data and staff training for improvement. And then here are some really great resources. TechSoup has a digital assessment tool for nonprofit organizations. Then technology budgeting worksheet. We have a tech budget worksheet if you want to see. We have a free nonprofit policy builder that's built on AI if you need to get some policies in place. You can do a cybersecurity consultation, otherwise known as our tech check, which is available through TechSoup. Again, I put a link here to if you needed some hardware, if you got some infrastructure and need to replace some of that, to TechSoup's computers, their hardware discounts. And then if you want to talk about outsourcing IT, right, letting someone handle some of this or helping you aid in your work, there's managed IT services. And then there's my email address if you want to send me an email with any questions or set up some time to chat. I'm happy to do it. And then that leaves us about 5 minutes for questions. Magic How, Kate is saying Magic How is another tool like Scribe that is really liked. I think all of us that's ever had to put training together, we know how painful that is, and keeping it updated. We got an excellent hack. We appreciate you all spending the time. I know it's a lot to digest. Again, if you ever want to reach out and talk about it, I'm happy to do it. And I hope you find the resources valuable. And I will get this presentation over to Aretha and she will send it out to you all. Have a great day.